No conclusions can be more agreeable to scepticism than such as make discoveries concerning the weakness and narrow limits of human reason and capacity. In our reasonings concerning matter of fact, there are all imaginable degrees of assurance, from the highest certainty to the lowest species of moral evidence. A wise man, therefore, proportions his belief to the evidence. The life of man is of no greater importance to the universe than that of an oyster. It is seldom that liberty of any kind is lost all at once. Truth is disputable, not human taste. Human happiness seems to consist in three ingredients to action: pleasure and indolence. By the term impression, then, I mean all our more lively perceptions when we hear or see or feel or love or hate or desire or will. These are to be distinguished from ideas, which are the fainter perceptions of which we are conscious when we reflect on our impressions. It is on opinion only that government is founded, and this maxim extends to the most despotic and most military governments, as well as to the most free and most popular. The imagination of man is naturally sublime, delighted with whatever is remote and extraordinary, and running, without control, into the most distant parts of space and time in order to avoid the objects which custom has rendered too familiar to it. Almost every one has a predominant inclination, to which his other desires and affections submit, and which governs him, though perhaps with some intervals, though the whole course of his life. In a vain man, the smallest spark may kindle into the greatest flame, because the materials are always prepared for it. In all ages of the world, priests have been enemies of liberty. The great subverter of Pyrrhonism, or the excessive principles of scepticism, is action, and employment, and the occupations of common life. Every movement of the theatre by a skillful poet is communicated, as it were, by magic, to the spectators, who weep, tremble, resent, rejoice, and are inflamed with all the variety of passions which actuate the several personages of the drama. No man ever threw away life while it was worth keeping. Of all sciences there is none where first appearances are more deceitful than in politics. Custom, then, is the great guide of human life. It is that principle alone which renders our experience useful to us, and makes us expect, for the future, a similar train of events with those which have appeared in the past. Nothing endears so much a friend as sorrow for his death. The pleasure of his company has not so powerful an influence. 100 cabinet makers in London can work a table or a chair equally well, but no one poet can write verses with such spirit and elegance as Mr. Pope. The gazing populace receive greedily, without examination, whatever soothes superstition and promotes wonder. All general maxims in politics ought to be established with great caution, and that irregular and extraordinary appearances are frequently discovered in the moral, as well as in the physical world. All this creative power of the mind amounts to no more than the faculty of compounding, transposing, augmenting, or diminishing the materials afforded us by senses and experience. There is not to be found, in all history, any miracle attested by a sufficient number of men, of such unquestioned good sense, education, and learning, as to secure us against all delusion in themselves. In our reasonings concerning fact, there are all imaginable degrees of assurance. A wise man therefore proportions his belief to the evidence. They all make up new species of crime and bring unhappiness in their train. When I hear a man is religious, I conclude he is a rascal, though I know some instances of very good men being religious. The law always limits every power it gives. Great pleasures are much less frequent than great pains. All power, even the most despotic, rests ultimately on opinion. The Christian religion not only was at first attended with miracles, but even at this day cannot be believed by any reasonable person without one. It is not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the whole world to the scratching of my finger. Luxury is a word of uncertain signification, and may be taken in a good as in a bad sense. To have recourse to the veracity of the Supreme Being in order to prove the veracity of our senses is surely making a very unexpected circuit. Long before we have reached the last steps of the argument leading to our theory, we are already in fairyland. Heroism, or military glory, is much admired by the generality of mankind. They consider it as the most sublime kind of merit. Men of cool reflection are not so sanguine in their praises of it. But I would still reply that the knavery and folly of men are such common phenomena that I should rather believe the most extraordinary events to arise from their concurrence than admit of so signal a violation of the laws of nature. A common expressions are a disfigurement rather than an embellishment of discourse. Happy the man whom indulgent fortune allows to pay to virtue what he owes to nature, and to make a generous gift of what must otherwise be ravished from him by cruel necessity. Nature is always too strong for principle. Heaven and hell suppose two distinct species of men, the good and the bad, but the greatest part of mankind float betwixt vice and virtue. I never asserted such an absurd thing as that things arise without a cause. Men are much oftener thrown on their knees by the melancholy than by the agreeable passions. That students of philosophy ought first to learn logics, then ethics, next physics, last of all the nature of the gods. /1. When we think back on our past sensations and feelings, our thought is a faithful mirror that copies its objects truly, but it does so in colors that are fainter and more washed out than those in which our original perceptions were clothed. The bigotry of theologians is a malady which seems almost incurable. What praise is implied in the simple epithet useful, what reproach in the contrary. The first ideas of religion arose not from contemplation of the works of nature, but from a concern with regard to the events of life. We make allowance for a certain degree of selfishness in men, because we know it to be inseparable from human nature, and inherent in our frame and constitution. By this reflection we correct those sentiments of blame, which so naturally arise upon any opposition. Nothing is more usual than for philosophers to encroach upon the province of grammarians, and to engage in disputes of words, while they imagine that they are handling controversies of the deepest importance and concern.